Last year I showed you a model of Rex Heuermann's house. Although I'm pretty happy with how the upstairs turned out, modelling the basement was a different kettle of fish. In recent weeks I began to rebuild the model. This was done using documentary footage, the blueprints, and information from a source who was actually inside the basement. I'm just going to jump right in, give you a tour, and then afterwards I'll circle back and go into more detail. So we're going to start off standing at the top of the stairs in the kitchen, looking down into the basement. At the end there is a utility room / boiler room on the right. We'll take a look at that later, but for now we are going left into this corridor area. Once you turn the corner from the corridor, you walk into this open living area. In the documentary, it is filled with stuff, but it was likely different before the police tore the house apart. Now, just bear in mind, this isn't to scale. I had to judge everything by looking at the documentary footage. In my previous video, I placed a bar over in this corner. However, it was actually a larger wet bar that was situated in this corner. Over here, there is a small room. It has a sink and a toilet. I'll explain more about it later on. If you go through this door, you enter Rex's former bedroom area. This room provides access to the Gilgo door exit, the gun vault, and the infamous quote-unquote hidden room. There is also a large closet space over on this side. The hidden room is just a very narrow corridor that runs between the closets on either side. This is where Heuermann kept his safe. Over here we have the gun vault, which had 297 guns. Heuermann added this room at some point after the murder of Jessica Taylor in 2003. There is also a possibility that it wasn't added until after the killings. Robert Macedonio, who is the lawyer for Rex's wife, Asa Ellerup, has expressed his belief that this former bedroom area was the kill site. I will touch on that subject later on. Okay, so now I'm just going to clarify a few points. In my first model, I got the utility room pretty right. However, the corridor area at the bottom of the stairs was far too long and slightly too wide. The details about the living area and the bar were pretty fuzzy. To be honest, the entire eastern side was a bit of a mystery. Understandably, because it's an ongoing investigation, my source was somewhat hesitant to share too many details. But obviously since then, the documentary has been released and the cat is now firmly out of the bag. One of my sources saw the living area and utility room at some point in the mid-2000s. When I sent them a screenshot of the corridor area, they were actually shocked. For example, when they were down here, there was carpet on the floor. They have no memory of seeing any tiles or linoleum. So just bear in mind that we are dealing with old memories and a place that may have changed a lot over the years. You also have to bear in mind that when the police finished their search, they basically just took everything and dumped it back inside. Almost every photo and video you've seen was taken after the search. Although they clearly kept a lot of stuff to the point that they may have been hoarders, I presume that it was a little more organized than what we have seen. You also have to realize that we saw the basement in the exact way that the filming crew wanted us to see it. The production team were given full access, and so they basically had free roam to turn it into a filming set. Their aim would have been to create a spooky place, and they would have done this by moving stuff around, covering certain windows, and even modifying the lighting. They're not trying to intentionally mislead you, they're just following a creative vision for effect. Another thing about the footage is that some of it was filmed before the second search, and some of it was filmed after. So you're actually seeing some of the rooms before and after the police ripped the paneling from the walls. now I'm going to go into further detail about certain parts of the basement. There was a wet bar over in this corner. I'm told that it looked very similar to this type of design. I don't know what materials it was made out of, or what finish it had, or what the ceiling trim looked like, but you get the point. It was partially sectioned off by a counter. Again, none of this is to scale. I don't know what kind of finish the counter had. This is just to give you an example of what it looked like. In the footage, it looks like there are cabinets and shelving units on this side of the wall. I've been told that there was a couch in the basement during the 2000s. I'm not sure where it was positioned. It could have been over here, or it could have been over by these cabinets, or perhaps it was here. Your guess is as good as mine. In the 2000s, this small room was a laundry room. It had a washer and dryer. The sink and toilet weren't added until the summer of 2009. To be exact, they were added in the days and weeks following the disappearance of Melissa Bartholomew. I'll go deeper into this subject later on. This used to be a part of Rex's bedroom. However, later he turned it into some kind of workroom. Before he built the gun vault, this was where he kept his guns. He didn't allow people into this area, this former bedroom area, because, and I quote, "I have guns lying around in there." My personal interpretation of that phrase, lying around, is that some were in the closet, some were in the secret room, and some were just placed against the wall. Macedonio believes this was the kill room. There are some discrepancies in his statements, but I don't want to get bogged down, so I'll save that discussion for later on. The utility room is accessible via the door at the end of the stairs. Notably, this appears to be the only room in the basement that didn't feature in the documentary. One source saw this room between the 2003 murder of Jessica Taylor and the 2007 murder of Maureen Brainard Barnes. They were adamant that, at the time, it was one big dark and dirty unfinished room with exposed ceiling beams. They are certain of this because they noted a crawl space and remembered how far it was from this basement window. And obviously, if the gun vault did exist back then, they wouldn't have been able to see any windows. Especially this one on the northern side, as this concrete wall was added when he built the gun vault. Recently, Robert Macedonio appeared on the Unraveled podcast, and he did indeed confirm that prior to the gun vault, it was one big room on the left side of the basement. So when he was building the vault, he basically got concrete blocks and divided up this room. When my source read about the gun vault in the news, they presumed that it was located in bedroom area, simply because that place was off limits when they were visiting. So they were very confused when Macedonio told me that the vault was to your right when you came down the Bilko steps. Of course, what they didn't realize was that the vault as we know it simply didn't exist at the time. Although we know it didn't exist in the mid-2000s, we still don't know when it was built. Macedonio has said that he doesn't know when it was constructed. Rex's former work colleagues said that he ordered a lot of concrete when he was building it, but they didn't specify which year it happened. If you take a close look at the panelling, you'll notice that it appears to be untreated or lightly treated softwood, such as pine. Judging by the colour, the wood isn't very old. It looks relatively new, especially against the darker 1970s/1980s style decor in the rest of the basement. For all we know, the vault wasn't built until after the Gilgo Beach murders, which would make sense if you think about it. There's a lot of heat, he's forced to stop or pause indefinitely, so the basement has lost its original function. So why not rip it all up and build a vault? Note that I'm still not sure if the large utility room was connected to the bedroom area during the 2000s. Personally, I can't see why they wouldn't have connected the two while they were separating up the basement. However, that's speculative on my part, as the room was pretty dark and my source cannot remember seeing any doors. In June of 2024, the Peacock documentary crew filmed Robert Macedonio going through the planning document. During that scene, he pointed out that the former bedroom area was the kill room. 1 month after that scene was filmed, he spoke to News 12 about the recently released blueprints. In that interview, he said that the task force focused most of its efforts on the utility room/gun vault section. During the interview, they filmed him pointing to the northern section of the former utility room, i.e. the current gun vault. Then, recently, he told the Unraveled podcast that the kill room was in the bedroom. So as you can see, there is a discrepancy. Now, I contacted Macedonio, however, I received no response. It's very possible that he made a mistake in the News 12 interview, but we simply don't know. His contention that the bedroom was the kill site appears to be based on the fact that the task force ripped off the paneling and some of the ceiling tiles. However, if that's the entire basis for it, and he isn't withholding other information that he is privy to, then it doesn't really fill me with 100% confidence. If you look at this image that was taken after the second search, you can see that the task force also ripped off all of the paneling in the gun vault, which was previously a part of the utility room. And obviously, the utility room/gun vault has exposed beams, so the police would not have had to rip down any ceiling tiles. So if he is basing it on paneling and ceiling tiles alone, then the exact location of the kill room becomes a little more uncertain. Now, I'm not saying this isn't the kill room. It would actually make a lot of sense. I would just like more confirmation than ripped off panels and removed ceiling tiles, especially seeing as his use of this basement likely evolved over time. I know that many people are intrigued by the idea that he committed the crimes in his former bedroom because of the psychological aspect. You know, it's a oh wow moment. However, sexual sadists like Rex are often very pragmatic creatures. They like to master every little aspect of the crime. This isn't just about avoiding detection. It is actually a key part of the build-up. Mastering the crime and planning things out is a part of the fantasy, which is why he created such a detailed planning document. So, if he did select this former bedroom area as a torture chamber, then I would imagine that it was because of a more practical reason. From Rex's perspective, there are two important factors. These are sound and space. When I look at this room, I'm not thinking about him actualizing his sexual fantasies in the same place where they were born. I'm looking at the lack of windows. I'm also looking at this bilko door, because he didn't just have one door, he had two doors, an inner one and an outer one. This would have helped to restrict the amount of sound escaping the basement. In his document, he mentions tarps and drop cloths. If he were to place one of those heavy painter's drop cloths over this door, then that's essentially 3 layers that sound would have to travel through. So from a sound perspective, this room makes sense. However, from a forensic perspective, and when you think in terms of the space that was required to erect suspension devices from the ceiling and set up tables, then the unfinished utility room makes more sense. The exposed beams would also give him a blank canvas to erect suspension devices. Remember that he was likely fine-tuning his crimes over time, therefore he may have moved from one room to the next. It is also very possible that both rooms were used at the same time. In his planning document, his prep section refers to setting up a stage, adding the suspension device, preparing the holding area, and building a table. To me, it seems like a lot of stuff to set up in this relatively small room. His need to experiment and fine-tune his crimes, coupled with the ever-changing nature of the basement and family situation, makes it difficult to pinpoint one area and be sure of that area. In the recent Peacock documentary, Asa said that Rex called her just before he joined her in Iceland in 2009. When he called, he said that he had remodeled their bathroom, redone the plumbing, and installed a sink and toilet in the basement. Receipts show that he purchased the plumbing supplies on July 12, 2009, which was just 2 days after Melissa Bartholomew went missing. So, the question on many people's minds is, why? Well, firstly, ripping apart the bathroom would have given him a cover story to completely rip apart the plumbing, replace pipes, and do a full deep clean. He could ensure that there weren't any hairs or any other biological material clogged somewhere. Although you can use things like drain cleaner, there's no certainty that it will wipe all of the biological evidence. By redoing the plumbing, he could get rid of all the old pipes, traps, seals, and gaskets. Secondly, it gave him an alibi to install a toilet and sink in the basement. This was likely a strategic plan for future crimes. By adding a toilet and sink, he was basically creating a more contained killing environment. He would no longer have to go upstairs to access a sink or toilet. He could keep it all in one area. Keeping it all in the basement would also lower the risk of spreading evidence to other parts of the house. It's important to note that the toilet and sink weren't just an afterthought. Installing these would have taken time and money. It appears as though his waistlines are overhead, which means that he would have needed to install something like a macerating toilet system or some other pressure system to pump the waste and water upwards. Depending on the system, he may have even needed to break up concrete. I hope you found this model informative. I'm Wayne. Thank you very much for watching.